Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to ECA for the opportunity to speak to you today. So just a little bit about my background. So I've got a background in, renewable energy, marketing, product development type stuff, pricing, which I'll talk to in this presentation. I was fortunate to be the project director in the Horizon Power Ahead project, which has won several awards, and for being an innovative project and new product, and a little bit in batteries and wave technology, and also the founder of Energy Stack, which is like a dating platform for houses that matches people's needs to, a mix of tariff, appliances, equipment that lowers their bill or whatever it is that they want to do. So I've been asked to talk today about why we don't have more demand response and what tools and value propositions sit within that. And just for the discussion, I've broken demand response, into three buckets. The first being really around peak tariffs, the next being around behaviour change, and then the last one being more of the technological fixes or solutions. So let's start with why don't we see more peak tariffs? Well, historically, we haven't had meters that actually provide the necessary interface to be able to actually charge people on an interval basis, because we've had the older style meters. That is changing, but we still don't see a lot of smart meters out there in the market. The next point is around, can everyone be a winner? And as someone who designs prices, I would say no, much to probably the dissatisfaction of the room. And certainly politicians don't like the fact that not everyone can be a winner. So that presents a real barrier to implementing products that are actually going to achieve efficiency gains if not everybody are on them. And if not everyone's going to be a winner being on them, then there's not a lot of support to actually make those type of things mandatory. Next is around cost savings versus customer reward. So as a price designer, it's very hard to get the pricing right to incentivize the customer to actually make some changes that bring efficiencies to the system, but not to overcompensate them such that you don't actually see that saving in your cost stack. Because if you can't actually see that saving back in your cost stack, you can't actually offer that product sustainably going forward. Simplicity, we talked a fair bit about that in this morning's session. So this is both in terms of language and design. And I think everyone in the room would agree that whatever we do in this space, it needs to be simple and easily implemented. The last is what I call risky business. So I guess with any change comes risks, and I really want to applaud Horizon Power for, some of the stuff that they've been doing in terms of work in this space, where it's not easy to undertake these type of changes, and having the fortitude to actually give them a go, I think deserves applause. And I'll speak to a little bit more about that on the next slide. Next, we have behaviour change. And, not everyone is interested. So we've talked a lot again about that middle section of the people who aren't really interested. And the two ends have been those who are super engaged, and then the other end being, the vulnerable who, there's a lot of services out there trying to help them. So therefore, in terms of behaviour programs, how do you get the attention of those people? And is there a business case to actually get their attention is one question that I would pose. So at the customer end, they're kind of sitting there going, well, whatever program, whether it's a peak pricing signal or a demand response technology or behaviour change program, the first question that needs to be answered is it worth it? So, there is an argument to say that in terms of the cost of the peak, that in terms of value and convenience relative to other things that we buy outside of the energy sector, you could argue that actually it's a pretty good value for the convenience that it provides. But I think there are those people that there is a saving there and a meaningful saving for them. So the next question is really, well, how do I actually go about doing it? So what are the things that I can do that will make a difference? So For example, I've seen a lot of utilities talk about turning things off at the power and reducing standby power, but that really doesn't make any difference to your bill. So it's about focusing on the things that do make a difference, like, for example, in most of our cities these days, air conditioning is the big driver of the bill. The next is, I guess, can I do it? So there's a difference between knowing what to do and then having the ability to do it. So especially in the technology space as well, there's a lot of things like putting solar on that actually make a big difference with one decision. But not everyone is able to make that and enter the market. We spoke about the renters again this morning. And again, there's that equation between the utility or the number of different sectors within that supply chain, whether they be networks, distribution companies, generators, retailers, and so on, about, well, ideally what we want to see in a sustainable system is that there's a genuine cost reduction in the supply chain and that being passed on to consumers. So making sure that the reward compares well to the actual cost saving in the system. Last point is then around technology. So I think today it's only in recent years that we've had the real technological leaps forward that enable us to do so much more in terms of controlling load profiles and the like. So that hasn't been there in the past. Now that's in the market and available, but it also needs a price signal to go with it to actually make use of making the changes that actually make the system more efficient. There's also, and as a designer of demand response type products, there's always this dilemma of understanding, well, for example, the concept of negawatts from Amory Lovins. If I have a program which rewards customers for turning off or reducing their power, how do I know what their consumption would have been at that time? So then as a pricer, trying to understand how do I price that in effectively and give the right reward for the behaviour change. And then I guess the last component of that is the predictability of that response and integrating that into your planning. So some observations, I guess, from a range of different sources, from literature, from the project that I led in Western Australia for Horizon Power. There are some tools that actually do make quite a big difference. And first of all is just this on-peak, off-peak concept. And that differs, I guess, from the calling something, say, a time of use, where customers really didn't understand what time of use meant, but they certainly got the concept of on-peak and off-peak. That project also introduced an app which required a smartphone. We did have a non-smartphone version which wasn't very effective, but the app itself was quite effective in terms of particularly the self-learning aspect, where customers were able to get information about how they were using energy, understand that it wasn't turning things off at the power point that made a difference. It was other things like their air conditioner or their dryer or these type of things. And they actually basically self-taught what things really made a difference to them and their circumstances. And that was a really powerful tool, and we saw big changes in the first month of them using that, and then really they didn't need the tool anymore because they understood. Next was a Facebook community. So we found that whilst some people still, and I think Neil referred to it, that face-to-face contact was important for some people, we found the Facebook community to be a really effective way of talking to customers, and also customers talking to each other. So rather than actually having to provide customers the answer, they started providing each other with the answer, and we just had to moderate that those answers were in fact correct. And that went so far as to say, oh, I've got this this device that measures your energy. If someone wants to borrow it, come around and you can use it. So a real community feeling there. And the last was also solar and battery was another tool that we explored in to understand what the effect was on peak demand and demand response. The key observations there is we didn't talk about kilowatts or kVAs at all in that particular program. I've spoke about the self-learning. Trust was another key issue that, you know, customers really want somebody to trust and know that that person is trustworthy to give them advice. There's also a fair bit of anxiety in certain customer segments around how you interact with them. I guess there's some figures there on the bottom, but the point being that technology really achieves the biggest locked-in change in demand, and that is enabled through pricing. So why don't we have more demand response? Well, there's a hell of a lot of inertia embodied in the status quo. We haven't had the metering, that's changing, and we haven't had the signals. And again, that's changing slowly, but I think it needs to change more rapidly to really see technology and automation to play a greater role such that, you know, we can address those customers who don't really want to engage, but they're happy to make a one-off decision and have that do the job for them. Thank you.